My name is Jem Bentel. I'm a professor here at the university, and it's, for me, great to have our open lecturer tonight because Paul Rose was very involved in the launch of the Institute. We first met just over 4 years ago, and Paul came up with this great idea that because IFLAS was intending to take a bold approach to the sustainability agenda and asking critical questions about where we're going and if what we're doing is actually up to the size of the task. He thought that sounded adventurous and a bit expedition-y. He said, why don't you come and launch the Institute at the Royal Geographical Society, where he was vice president back then. And so he actually helped that happen and hosted us for our launch about 4 years ago. Yes. So that's it's great to make the reconnection and host Paul here today. Paul is well known in the UK as a TV personality now, and he was just telling me that he's managing actually right now this summer to be filming for a new show that's going to be about the Lake District. So yeah, forget about Yorkshire and all those other places you've done. But actually, so it's going to be when's that coming out?
It comes out in spring next year on BBC Two.
So when you're missing our beautiful views here, you can switch on the telly, BBC Two, and see that. So tonight, Paul is going to be talking to us about the Conservation Challenge and the role of the seas in that, and his work with National Geographic and various organisations trying to promote awareness of marine conservation. So I'm really interested to catch up with Paul's work, which really is at the edge of conservation communications. I mean, people he works with appear in Leonardo DiCaprio movies and stuff. So I think it's really important work, and it's quite a privilege to have Paul with us this evening. And he's the only guy I've met who has a mountain named after him. So I look forward to hearing about that too. Paul, over to you. Thank you.
Super good. Thanks very much, Jem. Just before we get started, two small apologies. I'm just at the back end of a cold and it's left me with a slightly croaky voice, but I've got loads of water, so I'm sure I can keep going. And the other thing is we had a little wrinkle with one of the projectors. This is supposed to sort of be a 2-image thing, so that's why it's sort of offset, but it's running on the one. There was a moment about 10 minutes ago where Martin said, you know what, we could turn the whole thing off and see if the second one will come up. And I said, no, please don't. I was so frightened that it might have nothing up there. So this evening, I'm going to have a run through about global sustainability from an ocean's perspective. And naturally, I'm going to talk about my work with National Geographic. I'm the expedition leader for the Pristine Seas projects. I'm going to talk about plastic, a bit of an update and a bit of a refresher on marine plastic. We'll talk about illegal fishing, climate change. Before we do any of that, I want to sort of revert to where does it all start for us? Where is that magic spot that we have? You know, where's our sort of superpower? There is something in all of us that is our one special thing. And we could probably debate for, all week or for the rest of our lives, depending on who we're talking to, as to, how we get it, what we do with it, and what are we going to do to protect it? What's the value of this special thing we have, this sort of superpower almost? We've all got something, don't we? That very special something. And for me, I discovered it was diving, but it wasn't because I was a young genius who knew all about the ocean challenges. I was 11 years old, having a dreadful time at school, was failing everything. I was with a group of Herbert mates, and we were all spooling each other down to be the, who hated the teachers most and who could get in trouble most. And in these Herbert mate moments, and bearing in mind I grew up in a council flat in Romford, Essex, I was a long way from any natural wild places. I was pretty close to all the urban wild places, but a long way from natural wild places. I was watching this man on television, Lloyd Bridges playing Mike Nelson, the famous Mike Nelson. There were my other ocean heroes, Jacques Cousteau and Hans Haas were making these fantastic underwater documentaries, and they would whiz past on the screen every once in a while. But the one I waited for every week was this man. He was having proper bloke's adventures. He was rescuing pilots from crashed aircraft. He was going in mines and rescuing people from flooded mines, and all the beautiful women in the world wanted Mike to teach them to dive. And I thought, that's for me. Why do I want to go to school and do all this other terrible stuff? I want to be like Mike Nelson. And some years later, 1969, there I was on the beach at Portland Bill. And in those days, when you had a wetsuit, you couldn't buy a wetsuit. You had to buy a wetsuit kit. You sort of cut it out like a woman's dress pattern out of paper and cut it out and glue the whole thing together. So obviously I bought the kit, and quite naturally, a la Cousteau, I had yellow tape on it, so I glued it all down. And I was going in for my first sea dive. I'd done my pool training, I'd done my training in the quarries and the lakes, but now I was going in the sea for the first time. And as I went in, all the world's ocean came through my leaky suit, and little bits of tape came off and all the rest of it. But as I went in and that water came in at Portland, it was Easter 1969, sideways, sleet, cold. It was a beautiful clear day though, underwater. And I saw the life, and there was crabs and there was the cuttlefish and loads of life on the bottom. I suddenly realized that I was a diver. And I couldn't have said that I was alive in the world's largest, least discovered, least unexplored, wild ecosystem on the planet. But what I felt was like, wow, I'm a diver. This is great. I'm alive under the sea, and I'm going to get all the birds. And that's my special thing. That's the thing that I always revert to, is this, when I was 11, I wanted to be a blooming diver, but I had no idea how to be one. And then in 1969, when I was 18, I became a diver. And that is the thing that has kept me going, that special sort of moment that I know I'm a diver, and that's the thing that keeps me going. So when we talk about the ocean, we all know that the pressures that are on the ocean, we sort of keep taking things from the sea, and when we're not taking things from the sea, we're stuffing things into it that stress the ocean. You've seen these classic images of the Marshall Islands with these images. I think everybody saw these images again and again and again. And it's the old story where the plastic items that we use every day end up at sea, and the birds don't know that they're not food, and they peck at them, particularly the chicks, and the chicks fill up their guts with horrible plastic, and then they just die on the beaches. And so these images were very classic, very striking images that sort of motivated so many of us to get engaged with an age-old problem, and that is marine plastic, marine debris. And you can't go wrong with seeing an image of this poor chick with items that we all recognise. We all recognise bottle tops, and we recognise lighters, and when we see birds like this, it's hard to look at that and realise, oh yeah, my God, that's the inside of a bird. It's a bit more recognisable when you see this. And that started this global awareness about probably 5 years ago. There was this thing called the Pacific Ocean Gyre, and that's when people realised, oh wow, there's vast amounts of plastic at sea. Everybody's had campaigns, everybody's done different awareness campaigns and done their best to do something about it. I got engaged as much as possible in my projects. I did that thing on the left, that left picture. I did that at the Zurich Museum of Art and Design, terrific museum. And the idea was to get a load of plastic, and we got some from Hawaii, the North Sea and the Black Sea, and it was all stacked up there in the main hall in this very simple exhibition. And once it was all in there, the scientists were asked, how much is that plastic? And it was a bit hard to pile it into a proper pyramid. It kept sort of tumbling down, as you can see, into great sort of piles to the side. And the scientists looked at that and said, well, we've looked at it for about 6 months with tons of computer work, and we've worked out that that is what goes in the sea every 15 seconds. So even if it's off, if it's not 15 seconds, it's 30, or what if it's 7 seconds, I don't think that the numbers were that far off, but this is what goes in, and those things meant that people could get it, could feel it and touch it. So we did a lot of stuff on television about that program. You might remember, there may be people here this evening that joined me on the Great Windermere Debris Dive. This was my idea to why not go to inland lakes and dive these lakes and bring out tons of rubbish, convert it to artwork to do two things. Clean the lake, and secondly, think about the ocean in a measurable scale. The ocean is so big, 70% of the surface, 99% of the whole living space on the planet is a sea, but it's so big and vast, we don't want people sort of rooted to immobility by the scale of the challenge. So why not clean up some lakes and realise that we've taken 11 tonnes out of Lake Windermere, as we did in one day, so how much more is in there, and try and revert that back to the sea, try and bring the sort of marine ocean debris back into where people live, and it's easier for them to engage. So, and we had some fun doing these things. I mean, I was amazed how many batteries are in Lake Windermere. People work on their boats. They love the Lake District, love being out on the boat, and it's all part of enjoying and being part of this beautiful, this Lake District magic, where it is a national park, but it has that lovely sense of a true wild place. And then on Sunday, when it comes to changing your boat battery, you show up with a new one and kick the other one over the side. So we found loads and loads of car batteries in there. Stuff like this, nut batteries, toilets. We had loads of divers from all over Britain come. In fact, it still remains that the Windermere Debris Dive is the world's largest debris dive. And that's a very narrow approach, but it is, because we had so many. We had 400 divers and something like 200 and something non-diver helpers. And then, like many people, when I travelled to remote places, I became super aware of plastic. I mean, hate to say it, but there was a period where you sort of almost take it for granted that there's going to be plastic on the beach. But once we all started realising, come on, this is ridiculous that we've got, plastic in our sea, then when I'm in remote places like the Arctic, you can't help but these places that I know never ever see any plastic, you suddenly start seeing all these bits of plastic packing up. And it's nearly always, the banding, obviously old nets, stuff like that, and these horrible balls that get wrapped up and stirred up on the surface and turn into big plastic balls. It's all plastic strapping, and they're just everywhere. This is also an indicator of the effect of climate change too, because when there was a lot more sea ice, the plastic all stopped at the ice barrier. Now there's a lot less sea ice, it's all suddenly arriving, and that's why the Arctic birds all have so much plastic in their guts. So there's this whole sort of awareness thing that started to happen to us all where we started looking at plastic. And I must say, in those early days, it felt like one of those problems that would just root us to immobility. What can we possibly do? Are there solutions? What can we come up with? Can we change behaviour? Is it the kind of thing that we can change everybody's behaviour on the planet to buy less plastic, to recycle it properly, to be responsible for it? Can we change industries to look for new ways of packaging? Can we look to the plastics industries, come up with chemical solutions? And now we're in that phase where things are a lot more, I would say, optimistic with the dreaded marine plastic issue. There's some great launches. I was there in Times Square, New York, when this one was launched, the Ocean Recovery Alliance. A very good man called Doug Woodring, a great friend of mine in Hong Kong, who's taken all these World Bank techniques and skills and all of his World Bank networks and come up with something called Ocean Recovery Alliance. Like everything these days, it is an app, and it's a way of tracking ocean plastic and where it comes from. These days you can almost do a plastic DNA. You can almost tell, if you could pick up a piece of plastic in the middle of the Pacific, can't do it quite yet, but you can almost tell where it came from. You go, oh, it came up from a river outside Mumbai. Can you believe it? So there's a way of tracking all this. And this has really excited the plastics industry because they feel that responsibility more and they're able to react to it. And then just yesterday, I was in Innsbruck for Sky News and National Geographic. I wonder how many of you have seen the Sky Ocean Rescue Project. It's a really, really great project. Sky have put together a load of experts on a big awareness campaign on marine plastic, and it's one of the best campaigns I've ever seen. It's very, very clever, and they just are back from Norway, where you should find this film. It's not a very good image from this film, but this is plastic being pulled out of a beached whale. We all see beached whales these days. But, I mean, sadly for the whale, but good from a communication point of view, this whale pitched up dead on the beach. They started to open up and find out what happened to him, and they just pulled out bag after bag after bag, plastic bags. It was just full of plastic bags. And we'd heard stories of this, but because they film it so beautifully and tell such a powerful story, it's going to be one of them. It's a bit like the albatross and the albatross chicks on Marshall Islands. This whale in Norway is going to be talked about a lot. I didn't have time to download a copy of it, but I do recommend that you look it up, Sky Ocean Rescue, and look at the whale story. And it's like the whale has come from the sea and has, come up to us, and there he is, full of plastic. And, the plastic bags have got knots tied in them, and it's obviously our stuff. So I think that's, strangely, another big positive step. The plastics industry are really on board with sensible recycling. There are some beautiful, beautiful projects out there that aren't just raising awareness, they're actually making a difference. And I feel that we're at the beginning of a sort of revolution with plastic. If we just got most of the world's population feeling like we all do, when you're there at home and you're sorting it out and it's a lot of work sorting out your bits of plastic, then you realise if you don't put it in the right place, it's going to end up inside a whale or around the neck of a turtle or inside birds, and therefore in us in the food chain. It already is in us from the food chain. It's a dramatic thing. We're going to make a big difference. We're at the beginning of a sort of a marine plastic revolution, I feel. It's an ugly mess at the moment, but I feel for the first time in history, it's got hope. And I think we're soon going to see the end of this. This image from the Plastic Oceans film is a reminder for me that if you see the Plastic Oceans film around, it's been winning a lot of awards, and I highly recommend you take that in as well. So there's the update on plastics. And of course, you can't think about the ocean these days without thinking about climate change. It's warming up. And there's no sort of better place to look at it than the Arctic. I mean, within our lifetimes, the Arctic will be pretty much unrecognizable. We'll soon be at the end of any we'll soon be at the end of any multi-year sea ice. So what this means is, at the moment, we've got summer sea ice, and then that disappears at the end of the summer and then forms again over the winter, and then just kind of comes and goes. It's 1 year ice. But what keeps the Arctic cold is the multi-year ice. And that's the stuff that is there summer and winter. But by approximately 2040, and this number has been around for a long time now, there won't be any summer ice at all. And there will only be winter ice forming. So all that multi-year ice will go. It will only be up in a small corner of the Arctic, which is northwestern Greenland, northeastern Canada. And that little bit up there is called the last ice. They're already calling that the last ice. And it will be a bit like the Serengeti. This is where we'll go in the Arctic to see polar bear and whales and all the beasties that love and live around the ice. This will be the last bit of ice. And also things like transarctic shipping, which is now almost happening. It's sort of happening in some sort of special worked up cases, will be a normal routine. The whole shape of Northern Hemisphere trade within our lifetimes will be very different indeed. The Northern Sea Route is open most of the time, and the Northwest Passage is also open most of the time. The thing with these things, the reason I started with this thing about finding your special superpower, your special thing that makes you want to do stuff, and how you're going to stick to that through life, is that I'm a firm believer in getting out there and either seeing it for yourself or somehow telling the story for yourself. So with BBC, I was up there, dived under the North Pole, dived a lot under icebergs, and then dived in the caves of multi-year ice to tell the difference between here's single-year ice, which is about 1 metre thick and melts at the end of the summer, and multi-year ice, which is about twice the thickness of this theatre with caves inside it. And by diving in those caves, I had the audience looking at the television, half of them thinking, wow, that looks fantastic, I'd love to do that. The other half thinking, this is a nightmare, why is he going in there? But either way, they were listening to me talking about multi-year ice. And then our Pristine Seas project, I'll explain that in a second. For the first time, we're now doing, as well as our 20 expeditions that we've put together and I've led, we are now doing a feature film called Last Ice. When we got back to Pond Inlet after the Northwest Passage work, we put together this little taster for the community. I'd just like you to see it to get a sense of it. So we've had a big old team working on these films, and we'll have, it's due out June of next year. We're not sure where it's going to be premiered, probably Sundance, which will be fun. I've always wanted to go to Sundance, so that's going to be premiered there. So first time making a feature film. None of us speaking, it's all the Inuit people that are doing, they're sort of leading this. What we've been doing is, over the last 3 years, we've been traveling to their destinations and filming how, you know, the change in the Arctic ice is affecting them. We're hoping this will become one of those films, again, like the, you know, the iconic pictures of the albatross with the plastic in it, and hopefully the whales with the bags in it, and then now this beautiful Arctic film about the last ice, you know, this last bit of ice, will help people understand just how fast the climate is changing and the effect it's having on the sea. And the other big ocean stressor, just to sort of mention quickly, is illegal fishing. I mean, in my lifetime, who would have thought that we would even know anything about illegal fishing? Illegal fishing was such a lucrative industry, not only for the fact that you've got people taking fish, paying no licenses, and then selling it for huge amounts of money, but it's pretty much the whole slave trade is all part of, you know, slave labor. inhuman conditions, and the fact that you're changing the largest, least understood ecosystem on the planet, the ocean, has been changed by overfishing. So in my lifetime, we've sort of had no idea about overfishing, illegal fishing. It was just sort of happening. And my grandfather would have laughed if you'd said that you could fish so much in parts of the sea that you could reduce populations. He would have thought it was the funniest thing in the world, that you could overfish whales, that you could overfish cod, you know, all this stuff that we know now. And then all of a sudden we knew all about illegal fishing, and it became to the point that what can we ever do anything about it? You can't possibly afford to have the whole of the high seas, all the open ocean, being patrolled by countless numbers of vessels. You know, so how's this all going to work? But thanks to some technology, life has now become very, very different. And very glad to say, all started in a practical sense here in the UK with an organisation called Catapult, which is a government-funded organisation. They put together some seed funding to work out how we can get maximum sort of efficiency from all of our satellites whizzing around up there. And where there was extra capacity, how can it be used? And there was stacks of extra capacity when these satellites were over the ocean in many places. Those that weren't measuring sea surface temperature or weather satellites were just sort of standing by, as it were. So they started using this Catapult satellite technology. And the idea is that it looks at every single fishing vessel, which we can't do. You know, fishing vessels have VMS and AIS, these systems that they have to plug in, and it broadcasts who they are and where they are. And it reads all them. Well, we could also read them on our computers, but there's so many vessels out there and so much movement that we couldn't possibly work out what was going on. But by machine learning, the computers get smarter and smarter and smarter, and they can tell when the vessels are in a marine managed area or when they're in a marine protected area and there's supposed to be no fishing. And they can also tell if they go into a protected area, unplug their VMS and AIS, go to work, and then pop out the other side of it a month later and try and sell their fish in Valparaiso. It spots all these movements and can even take satellite pictures of them. So this has been an enormous thing. So it means that we can actually, and then about 3 years ago, they said it's the end of illegal fishing as we know it. But then what happened is Google came up with Oceana with a project that, I mean, let's say Catapult is quite expensive. You have to pay for Catapult. It's a huge amount of money. But our project helps get the funding for the right countries to do it. So the Pitcairn Islands, Tristan da Cunha, Ascension Island, all these, you know, Chagos are all being protected by Catapult. But then Google came up with a similar one. They call it Global Fishing Watch. And I suggest you all, tonight or tomorrow, find Global Fishing Watch app and get it and log on to their little updates. And it lets us see the whole of the world's fishing fleet and what they're up to. And this is a pretty ugly screen grab, but you can see marine protected areas. And so this evening I'm going to talk about some of them. And you can think, oh yeah, Paul recently spoke about the Ascension being a marine protected area. And you can actually watch and see fishing vessels go around it as they're working, or every once in a while fishing vessels maybe go in there. And you can make a call. This is using the power, the mass audience participation of disclosing illegal fishing. And it's not unusual these days to say this kind of thing in the news. You know, you've all seen this kind of thing in the news. And when, you know, Palau, you know, this tiny island, was featured in all the great magazines and newspapers all over the world last year for its work with that. And headlines: Argentina sinking Chinese boats, Indonesia blowing up foreign fishing boats. You know, you would never see a headline like this. This was October last year. South Korea shooting at Chinese boats who are fishing illegally. And the people that do it, the leaders, the insightful leaders that actually make those decisions, are being banded around as ocean heroes. When we go to big international ocean conferences and these people walk in, everybody stands up and applauds them. Yes, it's becoming, because we can now find them, we can prosecute them, and not the least of which are things like this. I mean, the new high seas law and the way it's managed means that these vessels can be prosecuted. So it means that if a vessel does go in somewhere, fishes illegally, and then goes off and sells it, you know, in some remote port. Not only can we see them doing it, but we can now prosecute them. So life has changed a lot. And I believe, a bit like plastic, you know, we're at the beginning of a bit of a revolution the way that's all happening. With illegal fishing, we're further along the revolution, and easily within our lifetimes, we're going to see the end of illegal fishing. And that's a huge stressor taken off of the world's oceans. So then, here's the pristine seas. There's all these pressures that come into the ocean. Illegal fishing, climate change, and our habits of using the ocean as a bottomless pit for all of our wastes. So everybody has a different approach to what they can do about the ocean. Some people are long-term, lifetime actually, awareness-raising programs, and that's what they do, education and awareness. Our program is different. It's called Pristine Seas. And what we've done is we've looked at the whole of the world's oceans, and we're looking at the wild places, the truly wild, pristine places, to protect them. It's a bit like putting money in the bank. If all these stressors in the ocean are taking money out of the bank, then our project is putting money in that savings account. We're protecting the wild places. It's a great place to start. And it's hugely successful. I mean, we're a big team. There's 27 of us at National Geographic. We're a very big team. It was started by a genius, a friend of Jem's called Dr. Enric Sala. And he was, like I get, very frustrated with these awareness-raising projects going on everywhere. But who's making the action? Who's making the difference? Who's pushing the politicians and leaders and influencers to make decisions? And Enric was there at Scripps as one of these young genius professors, and thought, all I'm doing here is I'm writing the obituary of the ocean. I need to have an action. What am I going to do? There's all these stressors. Let's get the places protected, and let's do it. And he came up with a project called Pristine Seas, asked me to lead it. I'm the expedition leader. And look at that. Out of the 4.4 million square kilometres of the ocean that's protected, 13 marine reserves, 22 expeditions, we've done that. And it's interesting, it's 4.4 square kilometres protected, million square kilometres protected in the world's ocean. There's only 4.6 million square kilometres protected. So all of it but 0.2 we've done. So we don't normally sort of like push ourselves out there, but it's just worth mentioning every once in a while that it's been a highly successful laser-focused program. So here's a very short film, 1 minute 30, on why and how we do it.
Out the last pristine places in the ocean and protect them. The ocean has amazing regenerative power. We just need to let it heal itself.
The moment I set my eyes on these remote islands, I know why we're here.
And how we do it is our team is a mixture. We're very lucky in National Geographic. We've got our own media unit and our own science team, and pretty much everywhere we go around the world, we have a certain method. And what that is we fill in the scientific gaps, because sometimes these regions aren't protected because they have got big scientific questions, like the one I was just back from Ascension Island. You know, what's happening on the seamounts? What's happening in the real deep sea? So we fill in those missing bits of the jigsaw. We nearly always have to fill in the jigsaw piece that is called communication. And then with these two pieces, we've got good science, very compelling media. We then help the politicians in that country to answer their dream, which is typically get their place protected. And we do that with a lot of very successful political influence and the undeniable scientific facts, and of course the very helpful, compelling media. So we do that. We've got a bunch of scientists, classic marine science, swimming around writing things down, swimming around counting things, swimming around with transects that you've seen on every project you've been on, swimming under big icebergs, taking algal samples, plastic samples. When we're scuba diving, we're typically in the surface to about 50-meter range, but we're only divers, so we're only seeing with our eyes. You know, we can't, even though we're a very experienced science team with a very clever methodology that's repeated all around the world, we can only see what we can see. So then to expand that, we use these things called pelagic cameras. You can see Chris throwing one in the back there. And these are cameras that drift around in mid-water, and very clever stereoscopically means that we can actually measure and identify all the beasties that go swimming past these cameras. And they run and run and run. Hugely successful project. And then at the bottom of the sea, the bits that we can't dive to, we use these things called drop cameras. And drop cameras we love. These very cameras have been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench and back, which is the clever bit. We get them back. And it shows you how little we know about the sea. On nearly every single deployment of one of these, we find a new species. Pretty amazing. You know, that's how little we know about the sea. Very, very successful things. And when they're down there, they're filming. So they film for, we can put it down for 2 hours or 5 hours or overnight, depending on how we're moving the vessel around. And then to fill in the gaps, on many of our projects we use submarines, usually around about the 500-meter level. And the beautiful thing with these subs that we use is it takes 3 people. So you can see the pilot in the back, me on the left and the cameraman on the right. So if we're down there at 500 meters, I can be talking about what we're seeing to the camera, or we can put 2 scientists in and the pilot will take them anywhere they want to go. And if you're going down these big deep walls, the scientists can have a discussion and evaluate what's going on. Very, very successful way of doing things. And of course, when we're filming, we can do things that we can describe to people. You know, this is taken in Rapid Ity, French Polynesia, where the islanders knew that the Chinese were coming in doing a lot of illegal shark fishing. It was clear that it was happening. We weren't going to be lucky enough to bump into any illegal Chinese vessels out there. But what we did is every dive we were finding these beautiful Galapagos sharks with long line hooks in them. So although that's a distressing image, it's a powerful image and it's indisputable. So that when we're going back to give the right ammunition to the politicians, he or she can say, well, look, here you go. We've got proof that it's happening. So we dive, and we love to dive in challenging conditions. We dive in places where you get that lovely feeling where I pull up on the ship and I look around and it's just disastrous conditions, but we all just go to work. And I must say that's a great feeling for people like us. We dive in ideal conditions. We dive on those things where you're there, come back to the surface waiting for the boat to pick you up, and every time a wave just comes over your mask, you look and there's countless sharks, and then the wave goes back down and there's glorious seabirds and the like. And we spend a lot of time diving in these kinds of conditions, real pristine waters, huge amounts of top of the food chain predators. I've had so many dives recently where I've had whale song, so even though we're not seeing the whales, I'm doing my work down there and all I can hear in between breaths is wonderful whale song. And these images that stick with you for life where you think, oh yeah, I'm still that 11-year-old boy dreaming of being a diver, and here I am in these pristine waters. But we pay for those beautiful ones by having some challenging ones. I mean, we all like moray eels. Moray eels are a great thing for filmmakers because they've got the big teeth and they're doing this all the time as they're pumping water, oxygen-rich water over their gills. But we've never had this before, and this was in Clipperton, and it might be hard to make out there, but that's me with a moray eel. There are so many moray eels on this reef that they would swim underneath my diving gear and come out under my arm, and we're just all over the place. So we were filming this as a way of engaging with the wildlife And you can't go wrong with these kinds of images. People love it. And it's a way of me then talking about, and it's a sort of striking image that you can then, with the right amount of content, tell important stories. But inevitably enough, I kept bitten regularly on my ear. And so it was worth it for the film, but very painful for me, I must say. And then the other thing that changes for us is when we charter big vessels. I'm just back from Ascension Island, centre of the Atlantic, UK Overseas Territory, and for this project, we chartered a bigger vessel. We chartered the James Clark Ross, which is the British Antarctic Survey icebreaker. And on that vessel, we can use things like these camera landers, which are very different to our drop cameras. It means that we can really study the things on the bottom for a long time. We use beautiful long plankton nets. We can do swath bathymetry, which means we can arrive at these unknown bits of the ocean that have never been even accurately positioned before. We can do very accurate maps, which means that we can then deploy long-term instruments on these seamounts. They stay down for about 5 years. We can do bioacoustics. We can actually see the life. We can see where all the beasties are. So if we're going to tag sharks or tag tuna and put acoustic arrays down, we know exactly where to put them. And we could even do these drags. And they always make me nervous when we do scientific trawls, because we put a drag down over the back and we drag it around on the bottom and count what comes up. I mean, this has been going on through history, but it is very useful to us, and we do very limited amount of that. So that's the way we do all our projects. We've got the scientific element, we've got the media element, and it's all driven by the host nation or the local nation that want to get things protected. We've got a way of telling this. I mean, fortunately, with National Geographic, we're well funded, and we've got this great media team who can use imagery to their best. And this image was a cover image for the magazine 2 years ago, and you can't go wrong if you're going to talk about climate change in the Arctic. That's not a bad image, is it, of a polar bear on a tiny bit of ice and water running along. But it's just worth giving you an insight as to what it takes to get these images. I've told you what it's like to get images of underwater with morays. You have to get your ears bitten. We learnt that. But to get polar bears to understand the script is a complicated thing. So we would very careful working around polar bears in the Arctic. And the year we were up at Franz Josef Land, which was 3 years ago, it's the most northerly archipelago in the world, and Putin stood on it in 2010 and said that he would like to make this the world's first Arctic marine protected area. And then we went up there and filled in all the gaps. During that project, we had this relationship with polar bears that we wanted them close enough that we can tell the story, because that particular year, there'd been very little sea ice around Franz Josef Land. And oddly enough, when the sea ice goes out very quickly, and I've been around the sea ice a lot, and it does seem to go overnight. You know, one day it's all there, but it's all thin, and it's just being held in by the wind. Then overnight the wind changes, and you wake up, and oh my God, the sea ice is all gone. Well, that happens to the bears as well. So they all woke up one morning, and happens through history on Franz Josef Land, and go, oh, there's no flipping ice. So that means they can't feed on the seals, and there's lots of grass on Franz Josef Land. They fill their bellies up with grass, and also the little auk chicks, the little seabird chicks as they're being born, as they're trying to learn to fly and jump off the cliff, the bears all wait at the bottom. And so they're all starving to death, these bears. So it's a difficult time, but we're trying to film all that and be close to the bears but not get eaten by the bears. And we discovered a very clever thing. We discovered that the bears like the sound of our drone cameras. So we set this up, and you can see how careful you've got to be when you do this kind of thing. So you see we fly the drone, and then the bear's on the grass. Then we land the drone, and we send someone to catch the thing before the bear gets him. And then the bear comes and is interested in the camera. The tricky thing with that is that when you do that, I was the boat driver for most of those landings, is that after that one we had to learn that please don't all jump in the boat or Paul can't push the boat off the beach. And no matter how much you swear, I turned it, because there's a lot of swearing after. No matter how much I swear, if I've got 47 people in the boat feeling like that, and they're not getting out, the boat doesn't get off the flipping beach. But anyway, it was a hugely successful project, that, and we managed to tell a good story for Franz Josef Land, and that's why Putin signed it in last year, and it is the most northerly marine protected area and the first in the Arctic. Our relationship with wildlife is an interesting one. We've done the moray eels, we've done sharks, moray eels, polar bears, and then you might remember in that film, the first film I showed, The Last Ice, it's the bear making the big jump. You know, I mean, when the bears are making those jumps up in the Arctic, it's the early season. What's happening? All the ice is melting out, and as the ice is melting across the big fjords and inlets, then all of the narwhals are coming in. They're the whales with the big long tusk, and they're coming in hunting the cod, because the cod are moving, but they need air. So as the narwhals are coming in, they're finding they can sound and sense these open leads, and they all pop up. But they make so much noise in communicating, like I'm looking for cod, and here's a lead, and here we go. All that constant high pitched, which is very loud, you can even hear it on the surface, mucks up the seals' communication, and they can't hear all their clicking. So they pop up, driven by the noise, and as they pop out of the through the open water on the lead, the polar bears sit there and say, "Thank you very much." And they get the feeling in the early spring that the bear, the around every lump and behind every snow mound is a seal. So they get behind and jump. Well, one great night in the Arctic two summers ago, we were setting up to do that film, and a bear mistook my VE-25 that had some snow on it for a mound of snow that might have a seal behind. At 2 in the morning, I woke up with the big woof of a 900-pound bear on me, and the bear had done the thing and jumped, and by chance I was wedged between my shoulder and my head, under the sort of right elbow, as it were, of this full-sized male bear. And I woke up with my own body going woof, and obviously a bear. Tent open, snow coming in. I had the zip open because it was a warm night. So I slipped out my sleeping bag, and I saw the marks on my carry mat and in the tent, but I was 100% fine. And I just sort of sat there, completely naked, snow coming in, heart rate gone from resting to absolute max, going, there's a flipping bear here. And I just kept quiet, and I went to the front of the tent. I thought, well, you know, do you get the gun? Do you get the flare? But I had that feeling that unless, you know, it'd gone, why fire it, or what's going on? So I opened up the inner, and then quietly opened up the fly. And as I opened up the fly, there he was. And I just couldn't believe it. We both sort of surprised each other, and I just saw these two huge brown eyes. So we just looked at each other, and I was there naked, and I'd managed to grab my little mini flare kit. So I had this tiny little mini flare kit, which was about the size of a biro, and I just stared at him, and we didn't do anything, except I was trying to keep my heart rate down. I didn't want to appear like a prey. And then he walked off. I grabbed my down jacket, and as I rustled to get my down jacket, he turned and ran to the tent. And I just, heart rate back up again, and he just went around the tent, and I just sat very quietly, and then he walked off. And I remember as he walked off, then I just sort of went, and what had happened that instance, our night watch had fallen asleep. Our night, you know, we hired a guy to do our night watch. So I then got dressed, looked around a bit, went up, and realised that our man who would, you know. So after that, I remember thinking, well, you know, that's as close as I ever want to come to a bear attack. I had the willies for a long time after that, the rest of the season going to sleep, you know, thinking what's going to happen. So we got a dog, and I wanted to keep it sort of fairly low key. I thought, well, that's fair enough, but I was right surprised to come back to Cumbria and found myself on the news with the great man Shelbourne with this fantastic cartoon. Yeah, he put it in the post to me as well, so I couldn't forget. And then the interesting thing was that on that project was that we then got a dog, and I love the dog. He loved me because I knew where the food was, and he was a proper dog, proper bear dog. We loved each other, and he used to follow me everywhere. And as the ice finally broke up more and more, and we could dive closer to camp, I took him on the last dive of the project. I took him out with me to dive under the ice, and he was stressed that I'd disappeared, apparently. So the guys on the surface said, "Oh my God, when you were down, he was running around over your bubbles and trying to find, And what that meant was that when I came up at the end of the dive, unbeknownst to me, he was there, and he was so pleased to see me that he held on to me by biting my head. And so that meant, and when I say that, I can still feel I've got the marks here because he's big and strong. And so then I was on a bunch of seal bite antibiotics for a month and a half. So it was quite interesting to sort of firstly have the polar bear go for me and try and keep it quiet, and then find myself on the front page of some newspapers. And then secondly, not get the dog that we got brought in that helped protect me was the one that bit me in the end. So this is the way we do our things. And before I take questions, I'd just like to show you this very short film. And this is one of these films. It's when I go back to what is it that defines Paul Rose? And Paul Rose is a diver. That's my superpower. Is I'm a flipping diver. I've never forgotten it, and that I'm going to use that. Getting to when I'm talking to, I've done a couple of talks in the European Parliament. I've done 4 talks in the House of Parliament about nature first. Why do we insist on having an education system that's based on getting jobs for the Industrial Revolution? Why do we insist on getting people to pass exams and become something that will go into some sort of machine? Why don't we have an education system that is all about nature? Why don't we have a nature first thing? I do that, not because I'm an education expert, it's the last thing on my mind, but I do that because I think about being a diver. And this is the film that we put together for a big Our Ocean conference a year ago, and it's one of the ones that's worth watching as to why we look after the oceans. there's lots of ways to look at sustainability, and everybody has got, you know, from finance to you name it, all the different ways. But I can only look at it through the lens of a diver and the ocean front end. And I have to say that when we put together a science project for global leaders, and then whether it's from Putin, who wants one style of things, he wanted a big grand 1 hour thing, boom, 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 and the Russian version of David Attenborough doing the thing. The Seychellois wanted young Seychellois speaking about it with a Seychelles sort of sense of humour. So 20 of these are all very, very different, but they've all got that same theme, is that we discovered that global leaders don't read whopping great big science reports, and most of them aren't divers. But if they feel the science has been done, and we give them this whopping great report, and it's this beautiful published science thing, and compelling media to tell the story, it means they make the right decisions. And this is the kind of thing we can do with all sustainability issues, is look at a way of telling the real facts in an engaging way, enabling people to make smart decisions. So there we go. Thanks very much. And there's a bit of time for some difficult questions. Thank you.